there remains a particular subgroup, a specific tribe. They carry recollections of bulky cathode televisions. They remember the rapid dawn of the touchscreen. Academics are currently arguing they can't decide precisely how this group sits within the cultural spectrum. If your birth date lands between 1976 and 1985, listen closely. You are the narrow shoreline between two massive tectonic plates, a thin strip of land. The soil here feels entirely different from the vast continents on either side. You align with the Xennial. Many researchers have designated this fraction of people as a microgeneration. Why? Because the timeline of your upbringing is so unusually compressed. What happened inside this specific window of history generated a worldview that is highly worth examining. You see, perhaps that's exactly what renders this cohort so distinct. To start with, you spent your formative years in a purely analog environment. Being bored was a standard state of mind. You just had to endure it. You actually had to commit phone numbers to physical memory. And let's not forget the anxiety, the genuine fear of missing your favorite broadcast. If you weren't home, that episode was simply gone forever. In that world, time was carved in stone. Once a moment passed, it was gone. It left only the heavy, singular weight of the memory behind. Yet suddenly, right as you were crossing the threshold into adulthood, the landscape shifted. Digital took over. It wasn't a gradual tide. It was as if the laws of gravity suddenly inverted while you were midair, forcing you to learn to fly before you had even touched the ground. Most age groups are raised entirely within a single technological era. Xennials are different. You navigated both of these era-defining realities. You did it during the very years when your identities were still being forged. Your late teens felt like a different world compared to your mid-20s. That gap in experience was wide, wider than what most generations ever deal with. Consider the impact on your everyday life. Think back, high school, passing folded paper notes in the hallway, having deep conversations that just vanished into the air once they were over. Think about making plans. You couldn't send a text. You couldn't say, "Running 10 minutes late." You couldn't ask, "Where are you?" You simply showed up at the agreed spot. You trusted. You trusted that your social circle would do the same. That required reliability. That required focus. But then you hit your 20s. You watched as mobile devices became universal. You signed up for Friendster. Then you transitioned to MySpace. Eventually, you migrated to Facebook. Before the rise of social platforms, you had 3 ways to reach someone: their landline at home, their office extension, or just knocking on their front door. Then, all of a sudden, you were juggling 15 different chat apps. And you just intuitively figured it out. During your most critical years of development, you inhabited both realities. Current research into cognitive growth tells us about the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that manages our capacity to adjust, to master intricate systems. It is still evolving until roughly the age of 25. A notable study in Nature Neuroscience confirms this. This region continues to mature well into a person's 20s. This implies something crucial. Xennials were still within this window of high neurological plasticity right when the technological world was undergoing a total reconstruction. Your mind was like wet cement. right at the moment the world's architects decided to tear down the old blueprints to build a skyscraper on the same foundation. You were young enough that adopting new gadgets felt instinctive, but you were old enough to have a vivid internal map of the world that existed before them. Gen Xers were already adults when the web went mainstream. They can be cynical about new tech. Millennials, especially the younger ones, they have no functional memory of a world without a constant internet connection. If you're a Xennial, though, you've mastered both languages. You hold a master key. It fits the ancient iron padlocks of the past. It fits the biometric scanners of the future. You can engage in a deep, face-to-face dialogue without the itch to check your notifications every 30 seconds. But you also don't feel paralyzed when you have to learn a new operating system. You recall what it felt like to be completely unreachable for an entire afternoon. That is a sensation many younger people simply cannot comprehend. But at the same time, you aren't intimidated by digital progress. And this reveals itself in patterns you might not even consciously recognize. For example, you likely maintain a very different boundary with privacy. You grew up in an era where your most cringeworthy moments simply dissolved into the past. They were not archived for eternity on a server. That questionable middle school haircut, that messy breakup, that one night you had too much to drink at a house party. There is no high-definition photo evidence. It only lives on in the stories people tell. This fosters a completely different bond with your personal history. Your memories were allowed to be fluid. They could grow, turn into legends, change shape as time passed. That's how human memory is naturally designed to function. You weren't forced to drag the heavy anchor of a perfectly recorded past behind you. Your history was free to sail, to evolve alongside you. Research regarding autobiographical memory indicates something fascinating. The way we categorize our personal journey is meant to be flexible. Our brains are hardwired to curate our memories, to hold on to the core meaning, to let the trivial details blur. When every single moment is permanently recorded, when it is searchable, that organic process becomes distorted in ways that science is still trying to map out. But here is where the situation gets complicated. You entered the professional world right in the shadow of the 2008 economic collapse. A significant number of you faced extreme financial volatility. During the exact years you were supposed to be building your career foundation. That specific calendar timing matters. It matters more than most people acknowledge. Research into economic psychology shows us the truth. Experiencing financial trauma during this specific life stage leaves lasting mental imprints. People who deal with job scarcity during this transition, they carry those anxieties forward, even after they achieve success. It rewires how you perceive wealth, job security, risk-taking. It is very hard to erase. So look at this group. You learned to pivot through a massive technological revolution. You successfully navigated a whitewater rapid of tech change, only to be washed over a financial waterfall just as you thought you had reached calm water. You can handle change because you were forced to. But you might also have this quiet, underlying whisper. What if it all breaks again? It influences your choices, and yet nobody really talks about this specific combination. The mainstream media? They frame the conversation as Gen X versus Millennials, as if everyone born in that 35-year gap is part of a monolith. But the specific years of your birth, particularly during a phase of lightning-fast cultural shifts, create a very distinct set of experiences. They don't fit into those massive labels. Xennials navigate a paradox. It is honestly quite rare. You possess the self-sufficiency of Gen X, the skepticism, because you grew up before helicopter parenting became the cultural norm. Your parents likely had no clue where you were for hours at a time. That was just the standard way of life. You learned how to fix your own problems, how to keep yourself occupied, how to process frustration without a parent constantly stepping in to fix it. However, you also reached maturity during the optimistic golden age of the web, when technology was still viewed as a tool to unite the world, to solve our problems, long before we realized it might actually be making some things much more stressful. It is a strange place to find yourself, independent yet cooperative, skeptical yet hopeful, digital yet analog. What seems to define the Xennial is this unique capacity to balance contradictions without feeling conflicted. You remember the before, you live the after, which means you have the perspective to see exactly what was gained and exactly what was sacrificed. Perhaps you aren't drowning in nostalgia for the past the way Gen X might be. You truly value the convenience of the modern world. However, unlike the younger generations, you still remember what we traded away to get here. You lost the ability to be truly alone with your own thoughts without making a conscious effort. You lost the specific kind of patience that only comes from waiting for things. You lost a certain type of presence, the kind that only exists when there isn't a device in your pocket competing for your attention. But you gained something too, a level of connectivity, access to knowledge, a world of possibilities that your younger self could never have envisioned. If you're a Xennial, you probably feel like you're caught in the middle, too young for some conversations, too old for others. You are standing on the bridge between two different worlds. And, oddly enough, maybe that's the point. It's not a mistake. That is actually the core identity of your generation's journey. In a society that is transforming faster than we can track, having survived one massive cultural metamorphosis might be the most important skill you ever acquired. You've become an expert at living in transition. The world you were born into doesn't have to be the one you live in forever. The Xennial story is worth telling, not because you're better, but because you navigated a unique moment in human history. It taught you something the rest of us are still trying to grasp. How to be the bridge that remains standing, even as the river underneath it changes its entire course. From a slow stream to a digital flood.